Hello, Valentina. Hello, everyone.
Hello, Evelina. Hello, those watching. How we
Welcome, everyone, to our Wellbeing Insights with Elite Mind. And those are weekly live conversations where we are discussing variety of human needs at work and what we all can do to create healthier, more human working environments. And our today's topic is about seasonal struggles. And very often when we get busy in preparation for our festivities, celebrations, and end of year holidays, we often fail to recognize that not for everyone, this is a joyful and happy experience. So we really want to look today at that kind of the dark side of the holiday season. And what is it that we can do to support our employees, to support our colleagues? What is it that we can do to support ourselves? And what is it that we need to be aware of as we are approaching end of year to make sure that we can maintain good well-being and mental health in a workplace. So, Valentina, anything you'd like to add for our introduction and what our audience should expect? What questions we would like them to answer for us as they engage in a chat?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, with this topic, it's important to recognize that, with the changing seasons, we respond naturally to changing environments as humans. So feeling differently in terms of your mood, your emotional state is natural, especially at times of year where there's a lot of kind of routine and tradition. It can really connect us to our past selves, our kind of history and our previous experiences. But I think today we're kind of, like we said, really looking at the potential difficulties around this time of year. And what I'd love if anyone who's watching could kind of answer for themselves and share in the chat is, how has this time of year changed for you and over the course of your life? And what are the kinds of events or circumstances that might have contributed towards that change? Yeah, I'd be very interested to know.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm just gonna pose that question that you've shared, Valentina. So I think definitely when we look at maybe not necessarily always seasonal struggles, seasonal changes, right? I think, with winter comes a lot of change. And again, we live at this very unpredictable world at the moment, right? When we think of all the wars going on, when we think about, economic situation, there are so many struggles that people are experiencing right now. And as we're approaching this time that's supposed to be all, happy and joyful, we have to be aware of changes that are happening that we cannot avoid, but also maybe be mindful about how we want to change as individuals, how we want to change our workplaces, how we want to change our activities, traditions, and so on to kind of be better fit for for this world, for this environment, and engage with this activity in a way that doesn't have such a big negative impact on our health and well-being.
Certainly, and I think that's, in the context of work, very important to recognize that we live in a capitalist society and there's this constant pressure for consistent productive output. Yet there is nothing in the natural world that is consistently productive. So, everything is seasonal. Animals are seasonal, plants are seasonal, everything in our natural environment, which we are part of, is seasonal. So recognizing that we too as humans are seasonal and trying to incorporate that into the way we do things so that we can still have productivity, but maybe we shift the way that we approach that so that we actually look at that, we kind of incorporate seasonality in that. So potentially there are periods for rest, reflection, new ideas, kind of starting to build new practices or make changes. And then there are times that are more outward focused, and about kind of the external, and maybe say launching products or services or things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all kind of go through seasons in life in a way, right? But also our brain, our body is wired to be in sync with the environment. And as we have those long, dark winters, as we have, very different, even our body's metabolism is working very, very differently at this time of year than during the summer or spring. And therefore we are not necessarily maybe as productive and in as effective in some areas, but also it's a great time for reflection, for coming up with new ideas, for really thinking differently and reflecting on where we are and where we're going, and what kind of life, future, and ways of working we're building around. So I think it's definitely, as employers, we can kind of capitalize in a way on this reflective state and engage a little bit more, utilizing that to shape employee experience, right? So instead of really making it all very kind of like happy and celebrating and so on, which is also very nice, and it's important that we celebrate our successes and achievements, but also that we reflect and kind of take stock and see where did we get to so far, and how can we adjust, and how can we do things better, how can we support other individuals in a better way.
Certainly. And so kind of thinking about supporting individuals, and how we might change as the seasons change in terms of our emotional state. I guess there's kind of a handful of different struggles that could be facing individuals, namely seasonal affective disorder, winter. So if you're kind of in the northern hemisphere this time of year, you're coming into winter, and it's often a time of grief and bereavement. A lot of people die in the winter, especially older relatives or those with more vulnerable immune systems. And then that can contribute to a difficulty with finding the joy in activities that may actually bring up that grief. Also a lot of expectations to socialize, and also to consume alcohol, especially kind of in Christmas traditions. And similarly, there's a lot of financial strain at this time of year, with the pressure for gift giving, and kind of taking time off work, while at the same time as purchasing things. So I've mentioned quite a lot of different individual struggles there. And yeah, so it might be useful to go into some of those in more detail. I'm not sure, Evelina, which one you kind of want
Yeah, maybe let's unpack that a little bit. And I think, let's look at, if I guess, the purpose of this conversation is to really highlight awareness of some of these concerns that sometimes, it's just so easy to neglect, and so easy just to kind of turn the blind eye on some of those changes in life activities and other people's struggles, when we are so busy, when we are, really planning and really have so much kind of anxieties, pressures, and our own activities to plan. So when we are already struggling ourselves, it becomes also incredibly difficult to see other people's struggles, and to be empathic, and to be able to relate to other people's experiences. So this is something to first of all to be aware of and to be mindful of, so we can be a little bit more open-minded and a little bit more kind of outward focused, rather than just focusing on our own immediate needs. And maybe we can just discuss a little bit more, what are those needs? What are those kind of hidden struggles that we often fail to miss? So we know what to watch out for. And we can probably put that into two categories, right? So there are emotional struggles, So there are all of our experiences that are related to mental health, to mental well-being, but also there are, life struggles, right? All of the logistics of the planning and pressure and time and money, economic, social situation. So let's look at those in turn, and let's see how we can highlight a little bit more of the awareness, so we all know what to watch out for, and how to support those who struggle.
Absolutely. I think that's really useful kind of skill for us all to develop. Um, and I think kind of the first thing when you're kind of looking at the people around you is, like you said, Evelina, looking, remembering to check in with other people. And it can be very easy to become absorbed by your own concerns, your own to-do list, and everything that's going on in your life. But just remembering to make that connection with others and look at, kind of reach into those areas or those pockets of society that may not be able to reach out. And, especially with people that we know well, any kind of change, so changes in someone's behavior, if they're becoming more withdrawn, or even if they're kind of wanting to see or speak to you more frequently than usual.
Or less.
Yeah,
After all, yeah, one or the other.
yeah, exactly. So noticing that difference that's often a sign that something has shifted emotionally. So just asking a question, checking in about that, reflecting what you've noticed. I've noticed that you want to speak a lot more at the moment, or that you've been a bit more withdrawn. Has something changed for you? What's going on for you at the moment? I think that can be a useful starting point.
Yeah, and I think also it's important to realize that how people feel around this time will be very different, right? Because we have people who are religious, people who are celebrating, different religious activities, and they have their own rituals and traditions, which have very different impact on those cultures and ways of celebrating and engaging with that. There are people who are not religious and actually, use that time for very different reasons, as a holiday, as a celebration, as a connection. There are those who don't actually have other people to share those experiences with as well. So it is important for us to be mindful that everyone's experience is so different, and we cannot be talking about our own way of celebrating or engaging, let's say with Christmas or with specific activities, in a way that everyone can relate to, as it can be triggering to some other people who are maybe don't share the same belief systems, don't share the same religions, or maybe don't have this big family to go to for meals in the evening, and share those times. So as well, as well as kind of being mindful of that, being mindful of what we share about ourselves as well, because we don't know how that experience is landing on others, and what experience it, and how they relate to our experience.
Absolutely. And in a time that's kind of very heavily associated with tradition, we can sometimes, especially when we're wrapped up in our own traditions, assume that that's ubiquitous, assume that everyone's celebrating what we're celebrating, and assume that everybody is doing it in the way that we do it. And it's not to say not to share those parts of your life, but to just be a bit more mindful about it. So if you are going to share something, perhaps first ask what others are doing. Ask what does this period of the year mean for you? What do you have any traditions associated with this time of year? And learning first their relationship with it before you then share yours, because then you have a bit more of an idea of the impact that what you share might have on them. It may trigger grief, it may trigger happiness. So kind of, and also simply as an act of learning and sharing, it's nice to just learn what other people do and what their relationship with this time of year is, because we can kind of broaden our own understanding of the people in our lives, but also various cultures, various life experiences, and how that impacts how you might operate in the world. And I think that can be really useful for challenging ideas of kind of like hegemony and monocultures.
Yeah, and when we talk about well-being and inclusion at work, this time can be a wonderful opportunity to bring people together and connect on some of those shared experiences and shared celebrations, but also do it in a way that is not imposing as well, kind of, one culture over another. We also see a lot of kind of going out drinking activities, that businesses are arranging, Christmas parties, right? But maybe not everyone wants to engage in those kind of activities in that way. So if it's done well, it can be a wonderful way to share traditions, to share experiences, to connect, and to bring that, to build the inclusion and belonging at work. We've seen some wonderful examples where people are being asked to bring some of their traditional foods, where maybe you're creating some little experiences from your own culture that you're bringing to work to share with others. So it's really, really important that we are inclusive and facilitating the transfer of this culture in a useful way. But when it comes to mental health, I think this is where we supposed to be taking very different approach to just celebration and just sharing our traditions, because very often we don't see how people really feel behind all of this kind of happy, joyful celebrations, as people often put this brave face because you have to, right? It's a happy time. It's this holiday festive season. We are supposed to be all happy, joyful, and celebrating. And there's a lot of guilt that comes with not feeling up to it, right? So there are people who are struggling socializing, people who maybe are neurodiverse and are struggling to even be in crowds, to tolerate levels of noise, to tolerate levels of light, and other things that are happening. It can be really, really overwhelming. And I think for neurotypical people who are just kind of go through their normal life, it's very difficult to understand that, because this is not something that we experienced ourselves. So it's very, very difficult to relate why somebody else would not be responding in the same way to the same environment. So I think definitely something to be aware of. And if we are arranging some activities or celebrations in a workplace, we need to be aware of this more of a neurotypical approach of how people are relating to those experiences, and how can we create those experiences more inclusive. The other aspect that's very important to mention is that people who are already struggling with some mental health issues, this season will accelerate their experience in a way and will make it more intense. So if somebody is depressed, they will become even more withdrawn and disconnected, and not being able to relate to the experiences. If somebody's already anxious, now adding all of this, planning and activities is likely to make them even more anxious. If somebody has, some sort of kind of social difficulties, now this is again this time that will really highlight some of the insecurities in a way, or some of our difficulties of how we relate to others. So it's important to know our friends, our family, our colleagues, to be aware of what are those struggles that our employees are experiencing, and be mindful that during this time it will be an accelerated experience in many ways.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, when we're thinking about that in the context of the workplace, it's, when we go to work, we go into a wholly different environment that somebody else has constructed, and that is kind of on somebody else's rules and potentially traditions. And that loss of control as well can also be quite difficult, and at a time that, as you say, would be intensified. Our emotional states, any mental health difficulties are likely to be intensified. And so where possible, giving a little bit of control back. So rather than, say, the whole company deciding, to put up Christmas decorations all over the office, actually maybe you ask each individual to bring in a decoration that represents what this part of this time of the year means for them, be that a kind of memorial, be that for Hanukkah, for Christmas, for Diwali just past, or kind of whatever it means, pagan traditions, all sorts. And I think that's a useful way to hand a little bit of control back to employees, but also to invite connection and invite the personal into the professional space to help people feel that sense of community and connection.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's also important to mention maybe in this context is seasonal affective disorder, SAD for short. So quite a lot of people are affected by the darkness, by the season, and it affects their energy levels. They have the depression that is accelerated, kind of enhanced by at this time of the year. And very often it's very difficult to understand for someone who's not experiencing that, because it comes with, and in a way for individual as well, it feels like, well, there is no reason for me to feel this way, right? And yet every year, every winter, every Christmas, there is this overwhelming feeling that kind of arrives and stays with you for third of a year or so. And it becomes, when you're adding all of the festivities of celebrations end of year, it becomes incredibly difficult to cope, because for that person it can really be a kind of like last straw, how far they've been able to cope so far. So it's also very important for employers to be aware of that. If somebody is experiencing that, how can we support them? How can we help them with their motivation, with their energy levels? And there are some amazing things that we can do. And first of all, the easiest thing is flexible ways of working, because seasonal affective disorder comes with huge fluctuations in energy levels. And if you allow people to work with it, to work kind of more in line with their own rhythms and cycles, then they can still be productive. But if we are forcing them to be in the office, specific hours, then they are most likely not going to be feeling well, and they are less likely to produce any output or contribute to the team in a right way. Also, things such as having natural light, natural fresh air, and if it's not possible, having an artificial light that simulates natural daylight can also be helpful in regulating some of the symptoms. So it's very important that we are aware if anyone is experiencing SAD in our workplace, and we take steps to support them throughout that winter.
Absolutely. And, recognizing as well that seasonal affective disorder isn't just the winter blues, it's a legitimate mental health condition that affects a lot of people. And there are ways to support, as you've just explained, Evelina, and to really treat that seriously and kind of not sort of pass it off as an individual responsibility. It is your responsibility as an employer to respond to seasonal affective disorder as you would a longer term mental health condition that kind of affects you all year round. Just because it's seasonal doesn't mean you can or kind of the best thing to do is to just wait and wait for it to pass. We really do want to be supporting people kind of preemptively as and when it's about to happen and when it's happening. And kind of, as you've said, Evelina, there's lots of things that we can do in the workplace, supporting the use of light lamps, as sometimes called sad lamps, that mimic the color spectrum of the light at different times of day, to help kind of counteract some of that, flexible working, but also to really listen to what that individual needs and have a conversation about it. So equipping line managers and leaders with the skills to have those conversations, recognize those kind of signs and symptoms, and open up a dialogue about what somebody might need, rather than assuming what their needs are kind of based on what you might find on the internet or what you might already know about the condition, but actually encouraging them to express themselves and assert their needs as well.
Absolutely. And it is the most important thing is to equip our leaders, our managers, to notice those signs and to have those conversations, because very often we see in a workplace that managers are not giving any kind of soft skills training and development to understand other people's experiences, to relate to mental health struggles, and to be able to have confident conversations, and direct them to the right support. And that support, social support, and knowing that someone is there for you and someone is holding the space for you and hearing you out, can just be enough for that individual sometimes to cope, right? We sometimes think that, we need therapy, we need those big interventions, but actually social support and just being heard, being listened to, can have tremendous benefits on our health and well-being. So it's so important that we give those tools and self-awareness, awareness of others, and communication skills to our leaders and managers.
Certainly. And I think that kind of above and beyond what we, experience in seasonal struggles, as you've said, Evelina, that these are skills that aren't just relevant for now, they're relevant for everyday experience at work, and is kind of an incredibly high return on the investment for that kind of training, not just actually in the workplace, but for the individuals who are trained. There's a lot to say that will benefit their well-being as well as their ability to support others, because of how it affects the other relationships in their lives, and also how it helps them understand their own needs and communicate with themselves and others about their needs. And so when we're kind of thinking about those difficult conversations that we might have at work, I wonder, Evelina, what are some of the kind of top tips that you would give, both to people who want to understand the needs of others, and also about how to express your needs as an individual in the workplace?
Yeah, so we have our own clamp model that we use to facilitate those conversations. And when we think of, if someone is kind of like falling into pieces, the role of the listener to actually help them to gather themselves and to really hold themselves better. And that model is a very simple process that goes beyond just listening. It is more of a coaching tool that enables leaders, managers, friends to support others in a little bit more practical way, rather than just listening. So clamp model, I think we had a separate session on that. So maybe it will be useful for us to share the link, but I'll introduce that briefly anyway. So C is for comfort. And first of all, when we start conversation with someone, we just need to check whether they are okay. Are they sitting comfortably? They hungry, angry? Making sure that there's this kind of immediate physical needs are being met. And this applies to both the listener, as well as to the one that we want to support, because at the end of the day we cannot pour from an empty glass. And very often as leaders, as managers, sometimes somebody just comes to our office and just like, I want to talk now, right? But is this the right time for you? And are you in a space to hear that? So it's very important that, we start with this kind of pre-frame in a way, when we find the right time and the right environment for both people to be able to trust, to open up and have that safe confidential space where we are able to have that conversation. So that C is for that comfort, and that implies that right environment. Then L is for listening. And this is where we really try to understand other person's situation. So non-judgmental listening, where we ask questions about their experiences, but using the so-called clean language, where we don't imply anything. There is nothing hidden in our language. And the best way to do that is in a way how you would imagine if you like reading Wikipedia page. There will be some words in that are highlighted that you can click on it and it will open the new page, right? So in a way, just like saying, I feel sad, you can say, oh, you feel sad. You ask about sad, now somebody is going to tell you a little bit more about the sadness. Or, in a way, like you want to kind of click on that word to allow person just to expand and explore, just by using our tone of voice, just by using paraphrasing exactly what they said in a form of a question, can be also very, very useful tool, just to kind of showcase that, I've heard what you said, I can repeat it, but actually I want a little bit more out of this. And it's so important that we don't jump in with conclusions, assumptions, that we just truly, honestly, like listen to that person and try to understand their experience. Or sometimes we cannot understand because their experience is very different to ours. Just really be there for them and just truly hold the space for them to share whatever they need to share. A is for assessing needs and risks. So really understanding what is it, what is the risk of this person, or for example, harming themselves. Do they have support? Do they have resources? Have they used some helplines, some employee assistance programs, some healthcare cover? What is it that we have that this person could reach out to? And we can really assess their kind of state of vulnerability, the state of the need, and to what extent they actually engaged already with some of the support that's already available, what worked for them, what didn't work. So we can really assess the level of vulnerability and the support that is needed for them there. M is for motivating them to take action. So as we assess where they are and what resources they have tried, now we would like them to encourage to take that first step, to do something differently, to take some action to help themselves, right? Because at the end of the day, when we think about even people who are feeling suicidal, for example, people who are feeling in their most vulnerable state, the biggest gift that we can give to a person in that situation is a bit of hope. It's hope that things can be different, and hope that they actually in control of creating that difference themselves. So they're not in this helpless, hopeless position where their future depends on external circumstances or something or someone else, somebody else saving them and so on. But the best way to empower a person is to really recover that hope that there is a hope for a different future, and they can make it happen. It's in their hands, and there are simple little steps that they can take to make that to make that difference. So it's really asking little things of what have you tried, and what else could you try, what are other options. And if person cannot think of that, we can suggest them in this way. But instead of saying you should do this and you have to, just being very mindful of not telling them anything about what to do, and just maybe having suggestions of, have you thought about this? Have you tried that? How was that for you? Is there something else that we can do? Is there anything that you would like me to do? Are you aware of this and this resource? Have you tried? And how that worked for you? And just really encouraging what would be the next step. And then finally, P is for provide resources and support. So as we explore all of that, we can ask what support they need from others. We can direct them to other resources, to other specialists. We can direct them to other support options, and also be that support for them as well, and be open and asking, what can I do? And if you are at risk, or if there's something that you would like me to do, what would you find the most helpful, and what can I do? So this clamp model, it's a process built based on behavioral change that looks at how we can utilize language and coaching questions to facilitate that behavioral change in other person, to enable and empower them to look at their life and situation differently, and maybe take this first step to help themselves and seek out support in a different way. So we'll share the link to this. It might be useful in this context. Yeah, but I think maybe what would be useful as well is to look at kind of more of a logistical support as well, right? Like, what are some of the kind of real life struggles that people are experiencing? And in some of those cases, it's so important that we are also aware that this is not, mental health is not just something in our heads, right? Sometimes people feel how they feel because of the helpless, hopeless life situation and real logistical struggles that they're experiencing. And the support has to be very practical and very real.
Certainly. And that can sort of, through these difficult conversations, we might learn from someone as well what specific practical and logistical support they might need. So rather than kind of going through all of those options here, then it's, can be most useful just to ask, and practically, what would you like support with? And moving on just a little bit from kind of how to support others, let's also take a look at how we can support ourselves. So if we are someone who experiences struggles and difficulties with this time of year, what can we do to help ourselves? What kind of habits and practices can we put in place? What kind of boundaries? We really want to be thinking about balancing the pushing ourselves, growing, changing, and developing, and how that comes from challenge, but also the comfort and the ease and the soothing, so that we can have the energy to push ourselves to grow and to respond to challenge.
Absolutely. And I think when we look at how we can engage best in, with this time of the year, whether we are struggling or not, there are still, it's still a different season, right? There are still a lot of changes that are happening. And in order to get the best out of this, we want to engage with specific habits and routines. And the more we establish our regular, ways of working, living, and even having, the same morning routine, waking up at the same time, going to bed at the same time, making sure that we eat at the same time, making sure that we have blocked out time for breaks in our calendar. Those things can have a huge impact on our energy levels, because of course we have long dark evenings, days are short, and it affects our energy levels regardless, whether you're experiencing seasonal affective disorder or not, it actually affects everyone, right? So it's so important that we have those habits and routines established to help balance the energy. The other aspect is self-care and nourishing, right? And it's a time of the year where our body is very receptive to a lot of kind of like healing and self-care practices, and we should make the most out of this. This is also, this is both physically and emotionally. We are actually much more sensitive to touch. We are more sensitive to things like loneliness and social isolation. We are more sensitive to foods. So, we might not be exploring and trying new things. Maybe it's just, safer and easier to eat things that are, more comforting and much more familiar to us, because it's actually easier for our body to engage with that rather than trying something completely new. And this, because we are naturally at this time of the year, because we are much more kind of reflective on where we are and where we're going, this is really some of the best times to engage in therapy and coaching. And having that external expert support to guide us through the journey and just to allow us to enable us to reflect on those processes, but also practically to implement some of those habits and routines and have this bit of accountability about how do we live, how do we engage with our life and work, can be really, really useful at this time of the year.
Certainly. And, even if you're not in a position to pay for therapy or coaching, or, a paid for service in that way, lean into some other practices, maybe journaling or meditation, or going on longer walks and kind of having a, say, structured reflection practice during that. Taking time to kind of revisit your values or your intentions for the year ahead. And so seeing that practice with yourself as something that's consistent and ongoing, and not something that you have to lean on others for or engage with a professional to do. Of course, it's very useful to have professional guidance, and especially when you're developing these habits and practices yourselves and really learning how to have that relationship with yourself. But I also think it's really important not to feel that it's inaccessible to you because you can't pay for a service or, pay to engage with a professional about it. And so leaning into those, start, maybe try something new. Something that I think is really incredibly healing is any kind of personal creative practice. Now, that doesn't have, you don't have to be good at it. You don't have to, paint a masterpiece or write a moving poem or,
Try knitting.
Yeah, exactly.
Any of those kind of repetitive practices, and this kind of like hands-on activities, hobbies are really, really helpful for this time of the year to kind of keep us occupied. But also, it's very mindful activity where we are engaged with our hands, and it requires our focus and concentration. And it's really, really useful to do this specifically at this time of the year.
Absolutely. And what it does as well is, so it gives you that space to reflect. Often when we're doing something like that, it opens up parts of our mind that otherwise we might be closed off to when we're focusing a lot on practical things or figuring stuff out in our lives or relationships, planning, things like that, thinking about events, things that have happened. But actually, it kind of opens up this more creative part of our minds and allows us to wander, which we don't let ourselves do that often. And I think also there's often quite a nice balance if we are developing a skill, knitting, crocheting, pottery, anything that kind of is somewhat creative but at least tangible and practical. We're using parts of our mind that we often don't practice in our working lives unless we do a very practical and creative job. And when I say creative, I really do mean practically creative, not just necessarily thinking of creative solutions or thinking up ideas, but physically engaging with matter, like things in the
Yeah.
world.
And the beauty of those kind of processes, that you can create wonderful handmade gifts that you can then use for your family and friends. And again, I think in this economic climate, it's very useful to be able to make and create some of those little assets in a way, and have this personal little touch to give to others.
Certainly, and it's nice to receive as well. And I think we can become sometimes too wrapped up in the consumerism of this time of year, especially if you're someone who celebrates Christmas, because Christmas has become associated with present exchange. And I think having something that is handmade and more meaningful and passing that on can remind us to take a step back and actually think about what we're trying to do with giving and receiving presents. And that's about facilitating connection and focusing on the connection instead of the consumerism.
Absolutely. So I think, to summarize, this time of change, it's so important to focus on meaning and not on material things. To focus on, connection and not just, celebration and having kind of flashy, joyful festivities. Focus on listening and holding the space for someone, rather than just talking about your own experiences, and being mindful about how others are experiencing this time of the year differently, and using that as an opportunity to go in and reflect on where we are, where we're going, and what kind of future we want to create for the next year, for the next steps, and use that as an opportunity to kind of reinvent ourselves personally, but also organization, and reflect on that.
Absolutely. So I hope you've kind of learned something today, or at least felt a little bit reassured that there's lots of different experiences at this time of year, and everyone is valid and has the tools and skills to get through it.
And all that we need is just to remember to be kind, and to be mindful of other people's experiences. Be kind to others, but most importantly as well, be kind to yourselves at this time. So thank you, and enjoy the rest of the day. And we'll see you next week, same time, same place.